Hey, what's up, guys? I've been meaning to get to the works of Mr. Henry James for a while. I figured this ghost season, which remember, it's not just October, it's October, November, and December. I figured I would finally get around to reading Mr. Henry James. A very prolific writer, very interesting, very difficult prose style. Okay, this is if you read about Henry James, this is often brought up, particularly in his later work, let's say, which is the stuff that tends to be extremely popular. The Turn of the Screw, of course, is maybe his most famous story, and it is a ghost story. It's a horror story, let's say. And he wrote quite a few of those. Henry James was pretty much an upper class American guy from Manhattan, from a genteel family, let's say, who, like T.S. Eliot and other Americans who I kind of admire a lot, never felt at home being Americans and went to Europe. In the case of James, he went to Britain. Um, some of the work he wrote when he came back to America around the turn of the century, um, very interesting work. He's sort of a guy that met all the major literary European people, and he's kind of a parallel figure amongst the decadent movement, although he's not ever really considered that. But from what I've read of Mr. James now, he very much is a decadent, let's say. And when I mean decadent, none of these guys, even the ones that engaged in whatever vice or folly they did, um, none of it was ever good. I keep bringing that theme up. None of it was ever to be celebrated. And they sensed at the end of the century, that is to say the 19th century, and the coming 20th, were not going to be times of, let's say, progress, but they were going to be something else, something quite dark. It's interesting to, I could never have read Henry James's work, particularly the two I'm going to cover here, the two ghost stories here. I could not have read this in high school for sure. I probably couldn't have even read it in my 30s, but in my 40s, at this time in my life, at this time in history, the man's work resonates in many ways. I'll say this: his style is very complex, um, very subtle. There's a lot of things that are revealed. He's like the opposite of like a Hollywood film. I mean, these books obviously that he wrote were meant to be read by men sitting in like leather padded chairs, smoking a cigar and drinking brandy in some gentleman's club somewhere, like in the old Upper East Side of Manhattan, let's say. Of course, that Manhattan is gone. The America that Henry James never felt at home in is gone. And I find affinity with much of what he's written, fiction-wise, and some of the essays I've read. There's that American that never really quite feels at home in America and looks to Europe. Of course, James, Eliot, even Poe to a degree, and these others were men of Anglo-Saxon stock or Anglo-Celtic stock. I'm coming from the reverse. My family are continentals. In particular, my mother's family were refugees, German war refugees. And my father's family, of course, were the cheap labor of the turn of the century, the time that Mr. James's most famous stuff, the stuff he's remembered for, was written and serialized in gentlemen's periodicals, magazines. So let's go to the most famous one, The Turn of the Screw. They made a film version of this, The Innocence. Okay? It's basically about in England, a governess is hired at an estate to be the nanny or the governess, let's say, of two small children, a boy and a girl, the nephew and niece of a man of means who sort of flits in and out. You never really quite see him. And the whole thing is that the governess eventually starts to see people that should not be at the estate. And slowly they're revealed to be the former governess, the woman that preceded her, and a man of questionable character. I guess he was a groundskeeper. And not only does this woman see them, the issue that seeing them, not only should they not be there, they are both deceased. So as the story unfolds, the encounters with these phantoms increases. I'm gonna read a little scene here, and you're gonna see what I'm talking about with his writing style. This is something you need to do when you're a little older, and can do that. Okay? I had plenty of anguish after the extraordinary moment, but I had, thank God, no terror, and he knew I hadn't. I felt myself at the end of an instant, magnificently aware of this. I felt it in a fierce rigor of confidence that if I stood my ground a minute, I should cease, for the time at least, to have him to reckon with. And during the minute, accordingly, the thing was as human and hideous as a real interview. Hideous just because it was human. As human as to have met alone in the small hours, in a sleeping house, some enemy, some adventurer, some criminal. It was the dead silence of our long gaze at such close quarters that gave the whole horror, huge as it was, its only note of the unnatural. If I had met a murderer in such a place, and at such an hour, we still at least would have spoken. Something would have passed in life between us. If nothing had passed, one of us would have moved. The moment was so prolonged that it would have taken but little more to make me doubt if even I were in life. I can't express what followed it save by saying that the silence itself, which was indeed in a manner an attestation of my strength, became the element into which I saw the figure disappear, in which I definitely saw it turn, as I might have seen in the low wretch to which it had once belonged, turn on receipt of an order, and pass, with my eyes on the villainous back that no hunch would have more disfigured, straight down the staircase, and into the darkness in which the next bend was lost. Right? You see what I'm talking about with the friggin' writing, right? So, but when you actually take the time to read it, it's very effective. There's a lot made of some of the best stuff I've read about James is his use of negation, of silence, of the void. You can argue that this is a very pagan, European, Neanderthal thing to do, but that's just my little crackpot theory. But essentially, the ghostly figures in this, the way they're revealed, the subtleness of it, is brilliant because it's so subtle. The other subtle thing is the woman herself, the little bits that are revealed, the little resentments that she has towards her charges, the affection that she has for this man that has no time for her, the man who has hired her, the little subtle hints that there's something back with what's left of her family that she's from. There's issues that are going on that are causing her stress and grief to a degree as she tries to do this job of taking care of these very intelligent children, and also her obsession with protecting them from these people that she's the only one that sees them. Okay, so now you see where the ambiguity of this gets even more interesting, as you never know if this is really a supernatural story, despite the atmosphere. It's really atmospheric. You never know if it's really a ghost story or a psychological horror story. To be frank, you don't know if that there's actually a supernatural threat in this, or if this woman is freaking crazy. Okay? And as it goes on, there's little hints that she resents the children. Okay, and there's also other really sinister hints that James makes all the more sinister by not alluding to specifics of the relationship between this Mr. Quint and the lad who has gotten in trouble at boarding school and has been thrown out. And what he did and what he said, the little boy who's very precocious, very strong-willed, and you never know really what happens. And so it's kind of like it makes it all the more, the ambiguity makes this all the more sinister, and it would not work normally unless you had a guy that was a wordsmith like this. So anyway, so The Turn of the Screw, they made a film of it, The Innocence. I have not seen that, but I will. But this is the way this works, this is a really good horror story because of its subtlety and its nuance and its ultimate implication of you never know, and James never revealed it. The analysis of it has gone back and forth. As you can imagine, feminists really don't like Henry James. From what I've read and what I've read of the stories he actually writes female characters very well, very accurate, very complex, very realistic. Okay, so you can imagine this guy is, hated. But yeah, The Turn of the Screw. It's like Martin by George Romero. You never really know. Were there ghosts, or was this a mad woman? Okay, so now the other ghost story, and he wrote more. He wrote a bunch of ghost stories. I actually read The Ghostly Rental. That's the earlier story he did, which is actually a really brilliant story too. But I'm just gonna focus on the later one, the one here from 1907, The Jolly Corner. Okay? Now, The Jolly Corner. James came back to America to do a little tour to see how the country he had left 20 years before had changed. And it had changed for him greatly. That's the appeal of a lot of what he writes to someone of me today, even though we come from very different backgrounds. He came back to New York, and he actually wrote a book about it, and he was not happy. Just like Lovecraft was not happy 20 years later when he was in New York at what he saw. Okay, that time period that James came back, the turn of the century, skyscrapers started to go up in like the 1890s, and he saw them as monstrous things. Okay, I think they're freaking cool. They have some of the 19th century skyscrapers in Manhattan that I've taken photos of, and I want to see again if you can take the lockdown down a notch, let's say. But of course, a man like this thought things were monstrous. And so The Jolly Corner is essentially another ghost story where a man comes back from Europe, okay, and his family is all but gone, but they own property in Manhattan, very good real estate, and he laments the changes that he's seen in New York as he returns to his properties that are actually paying, that he's actually making profit off them. James in real life actually had a nephew that was a very skilled real estate person in Manhattan, even back then, and supplemented his income even further. Okay? But James was very, very, felt a lot of ambiguity about this. So The Jolly Corner is this man comes back, and he likes to go to the one property that he remembered as a child that was the Jolly Corner, which is now empty, as the people around him are turning the old buildings into flats for people, for the rentals. He's trying to decide what to do with it, and he likes to take frequent trips into this building at night, this empty building. James describes the architecture of it, which I really like as my side hobby of architecture. He describes the architecture of it, walking through at night. And then little things start to happen. Little strange, little subtle things. This is what I'm talking about, the subtlety of it that brings a sort of terror, okay? He's talking about a place that's some distance to the left of this point. It would have admitted him to the last room of the four, the room without other approach or egress, had it not to his intimate conviction, being closed since his former visitation. The matter probably of a quarter of an hour before, he stared with all his eyes at the wonder of the fact, arrested again where he stood, and again holding his breath, while he sounded its sense. Surely it had been subsequently closed. That is, it had been on his previous passage indubitably opened. Okay? Someone else has been in this building that no one else has the key to. Okay? And he, at the end of this story, he sees and he finds out who or what that thing is, or does he? Okay? The architecture, the sense of change, the fact that this guy sees that what he would have been had he stayed in America with all its progress as it enters the 20th century. It has no place for a man like Henry James of the old Anglo-Saxon stock, which is now given way to the immigrants that are coming in to take over New York. Okay, very, very, very telling, very interesting. Henry James. Read it later.